Welcome to the Hindu Daily. We have a powerful and incredibly varied stack of sources for you today. We're spanning some really critical topics, everything from judicial integrity and global power struggles to the democratic hurdles faced by millions of voters, and even the fight for basic digital freedom in rural India. Our mission, as always, is to unpack the key takeaways for you across the editorial, ground zero, and spotlight sections. And we're starting immediately in the editorial section with a, I have to say, deeply unsettling look at how systems fail victims. The piece is titled The Second Crime, Bridging the Gap in Women's Justice. It's anchored around the tragic suicide of a young lady doctor in Fultan, Maharashtra back in October 2025, following allegations of rape and harassment against a police official.
It's a truly sobering story, and the source does a brilliant job of framing this failure in two distinct parts. The initial offense, what it calls the first crime, was the reported failure of the system to even respond to her pleas for help.
Right.
But then there's the secondary, and you could argue more destructive, offense, the second crime. This is the systemic, very public character assassination that follows the victim's family's push for justice.
And what makes this instance so profoundly disturbing, as the article highlights, is that the secondary victimization didn't just come from, anonymous trolls or a hostile public.
No.
It came from an institution that is specifically mandated to protect women's dignity.
Exactly. The public statements that were made by the chairperson of the Maharashtra State Commission for Women, releasing details of the victim's private life, her communications, her relationships, it was a complete institutional betrayal.
Just a total betrayal.
The statements were, widely seen as victim blaming. They shifted all the scrutiny onto the victim's behavior instead of focusing on the accused official. It just starkly reveals how deeply this patriarchal culture persists, even inside the very bodies designed to fight it.
It feels like a complete circumvention of what the law intends. The law has worked pretty hard to prevent exactly this kind of character scrutiny inside a courtroom, hasn't it? I'm thinking of the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 2013, the Nirbhaya Act.
Absolutely. The legal framework is designed to be, airtight against this. And the most recent overhaul came with the new Bharatiya Saksha Adhiniyam, the BSA.
Okay.
The part you really need to know is Section 50 of the BSA. It used to be Section 53A of the Evidence Act. It's basically the legal hammer here. It states definitively that a woman's past personal life, her friendships, her messages, none of it can be used to argue that her consent should be presumed in a rape case.
And Section 48 of the BSA goes even further, right? It prohibits any cross-examination about her general immoral character.
That's right, or her previous sexual experience. The focus has to remain strictly on the facts of the alleged crime. It's very clear.
And this isn't new. This legal thinking has been reinforced for decades.
It has. You can go all the way back to 1996, to the Supreme Court case, the State of Punjab versus Gurmit Singh. The court explicitly warned against viewing a victim's testimony with suspicion just because of so-called loose morals.
Right.
They stated very clearly that every woman, regardless of how her character is perceived, has a fundamental right to say no.
So, if the legal framework is so clear, so specifically designed to protect the victim from having her character put on trial, what is the central failure that the Fulton case highlights?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the article identifies the loophole. It's the institutional commentary by public officials outside of court.
I see.
They use personal details of the victim's life to create a kind of public social verdict. The official might not technically be violating the ban on, say, identity disclosure, but they are fundamentally breaching the spirit of the law. They're carrying out a kind of extrajudicial victim shaming.
So the problem isn't the policy.
The problem isn't the policy. It's the patriarchal mindset embedded in the very institutions that are supposed to enforce that policy. The article suggests this gap, between the policy on paper and the action on the ground. That's where genuine justice dies.
We've just discussed a profound failure of institutional protection right here at home. Let's pivot now to the complex world of global protection and how major powers are vying for control over critical maritime choke points in the Red Sea. The article is Red Sea Rivalry, Israel, China, and the Somaliland Pivot, and it centers on Israel's diplomatic decision in December 2025 to recognize Somaliland as an independent state.
And this is more than just a diplomatic footnote. The source calls it a significant rupture. It dramatically heightens the risk of proxy conflicts and more militarization in the Red Sea corridor. But the most immediate and, I'd say, acute strategic dilemma is the one faced by China.
Because of its massive footprint in the region.
Its massive commercial and military footprint, yes.
So what is the specific threat that this recognition poses to Beijing's interests?
The article lays out three major interests at stake for China. First, it's a direct challenge to the One China principle. We have to remember, Somaliland established official ties with Taiwan back in 2020. So Hargeisa is a symbolic threat.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, this region contains the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It's a critical choke point, often called the jugular vein for Chinese trade and energy. Security there is non-negotiable for them.
And the third interest is controlling this growing great power competition, which is literally happening on their doorstep, right near their 2017 military base in Djibouti.
Precisely. So Beijing is, of course, condemning the recognition of separatism. They're sticking to their rigid sovereignty doctrine. But Somaliland really complicates that narrative.
How so?
Because it's had relative peace, it's held competitive elections, and it has maintained functioning institutions for 3 decades. There's a very sharp contrast to the chronic instability in Somalia.
So what was Israel's motivation for making this move now, given all the controversy it would stir up?
Israel sees this as a strategic counterpivot. It lets them forge diplomatic ties in the critical Horn of Africa, and they can bypass the traditional Arab alliances. Somaliland offers a potentially stable, non-Arab security and logistics hub just outside Djibouti.
So this move really forces Beijing into an uncomfortable trade-off.
A very uncomfortable one. China has to oppose the recognition, but if they put too much pressure on Somaliland, they risk driving Hargeisa even further into the arms of their rivals, Taiwan, Israel, the Western powers, who are all eager for alternative bases in the region.
What kind of response can we actually expect from China then, given the high stakes?
The sources anticipate hybrid warfare tactics. And this isn't just about military maneuvering. We're talking about targeted economic coercion against Somaliland, intense lobbying of neighboring political elites to try and isolate Hargeisa.
And information campaigns, I imagine.
Coordinated information campaigns, yes. Using their expansive media networks like StarTimes, which reaches millions of people across Africa. And this whole response is made even more complex by China's increasingly vocal pro-Palestinian position. That gives them a potent moral justification to oppose Israel's move here, especially among Arab nations.
We're going to transition now to the domestic sphere and the very complex democratic process discussed in the Ground Zero section, voter deletions and the Special Intensive Revision in West Bengal. This Special Intensive Revision, or SIR, is meant to clean up electoral rolls across 12 states and UTs, but it's generated a huge amount of political and procedural criticism.
The scale in West Bengal alone is stunning, which is why this is such a major story. In just Phase 1, between November and December of 2025, the Election Commission identified about 58 lakh, that's 5.8 million voters, as absent, shifted, dead, or duplicate.
ASDD voters.
Right, the ASCD voters. And as a result, the total voter list dropped from 7.66 crore to 7.08 crore.
That is a staggering number of potential deletions. And the human cost behind that acronym is just immense. The article uses some powerful examples to illustrate the procedural nightmares that people are facing.
Exactly. Take the case of Sanjay Mahanto. He's a truck driver in Kolkata port. He was marked as permanently shifted simply because he was away on a cargo run to Jammu and Guwahati during that brief revision period.
So now he's deleted.
He and his wife are both deleted. Now they have to navigate the complex Form 6 application process just to get back on the rolls.
And there's the story of Krishna Rai, who's worked in a jute mill for 20 years.
Yes. He was removed because he was visiting family in Bihar when the booth-level officer came by with the forms. And he's desperately worried about filling out Form 6 online because he's illiterate. These cases just show the inherent bias against mobile or less educated workers.
And this structural bias is reflected in the data on deletion hotspots.
It is. The analysis shows polling booths in industrial port and jute mill areas like Sambhu Vidyalaya under the Kolkata Port Assembly seat. They saw deletions at about 10 times the state average.
Wow.
This is directly correlated with the high concentration of migrant workers, who often lack the land records or property documents they need to easily prove continuous domicile.
And the analysis by the Cyber Institute adds a really interesting nuance here. They found that Kolkata, which is maybe surprising, registered the highest percentage of deletions in the state, not the border districts, which are usually the focus of political narratives about illegal voters.
Right. And in the Kolkata port area specifically, the firm name Singh accounted for the highest percentage of deletions, followed by Katun. That suggests a huge impact on migrant populations coming from other states.
This whole process is also complicated by the political dynamics around the Matua-dominated constituencies.
Deeply complicated. This group of Hindu Namashudras from Bangladesh are very apprehensive because they traditionally lack what's called legacy data, a connection to, say, the 2002 voter list, which is often crucial during these revisions.
And the political messaging around them has been highly charged, leading to genuine voter distress. You have BJP national leaders assuring Hindu refugees they'll be accommodated.
And then on the other hand, you had that controversial statement from the local BJP MP Santanu Thakur about a potential trade-off between Matua votes and removing other groups. It created an immediate political flashpoint.
The political outrage was swift.
Very swift. CM Mamata Banerjee sent multiple letters to the chief election commissioner demanding a halt or immediate rectification. She cited widespread harassment and unspecific summons being issued for the 1.36 lakh voters identified for hearings.
And it wasn't just affecting migrant workers. We saw high-profile names deleted.
That's right, the actor Dev, cricketer Shami, the poet Goswami, and of course the highly publicized incident involving Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, who was eventually exempted from having to show up in person. The sheer volume and the procedural problems just raise fundamental questions about access and inclusion in our democracy.
Now we're moving to the spotlight section, starting with the classic bureaucratic paradox in Telangana, the decades-long struggle for land titles. We meet a farmer, Maruthaya, one of thousands who has cultivated 22 guntas of land for decades, but is denied legal ownership because of Sadabainama transactions from the Nizam era.
This issue affects thousands of marginal farmers who bought land informally, often decades ago. The critical term here is Sadabainama. It essentially means an unregistered handwritten sale deed or agreement.
Originating from the Nizam period.
Mostly, yes. And they were never formally recorded in the revenue system, which has led to all this ambiguous ownership.
And the single biggest roadblock since the High Court vacated its interim stay in August 2025. It seems to be a simple yet often impossible administrative hurdle.
It is. It's the mandatory requirement by revenue officials for an affidavit from the original land seller or their legal heirs.
Which is often impossible to get.
Precisely. This affidavit rule is a deal breaker. The sellers often died decades ago. They've migrated, or critically, they're just unwilling to cooperate now because land prices have skyrocketed.
So farmer leaders are calling it illogical.
Of course. They argue, correctly, that proof of continuous possession and cultivation over decades should be enough for regularization.
To understand the current situation, we have to look at the history here. Previous attempts at regularization in 2016 and 2020 just stalled.
They did, largely due to verification issues and that long High Court stay. The current push relies on Section 6 of the new Telangana Bharati Act of 2025.
And what does that act require?
It requires applicants to prove at least 12 years of continuous possession predating June 2, 2014, and it's strictly for rural, small, and marginal farmers. But the consequences of failing this process are severe.
Because without that legal title, the Patadar passbook.
They can't use the land as collateral for credit. They're excluded from welfare schemes like Ritu Ferosa, and they face huge problems with inheritance. They're locked out.
And this all seems to boil down to bureaucratic overreach. The article points out that this killer affidavit rule isn't actually in the main act.
That is the absolute crux of the issue. The affidavit requirement is imposed through rules that are framed under the act by the administration, not the act itself. This loophole contributes directly to the slow progress, the alleged corruption, and the highly discretionary enforcement by field officials. They can easily use this impossible requirement as a gatekeeping mechanism.
So if the affidavit is proving impossible, what solutions are experts proposing to break this bureaucratic logjam? How do you streamline this?
The expert consensus is to shift toward more local methods of verification. They recommend ground inspections, getting witness statements, local inquiries, things that actually happen on the ground, instead of relying only on these elusive affidavits.
That makes sense.
There's also a strong proposal to conduct a Gram Sabha, a public verification meeting, to ascertain the facts openly. And there's a call to empower Tahsildars to issue the passbooks directly, which would streamline the whole process.
We turn now to a case that speaks directly to the fragility of the administration of justice. Evidence Tampered, the disqualification of Antony Raju. This is an extraordinary 32-year saga centered on an offense against the administration of justice in Kerala.
This case is a study in judicial patience and eventual vindication. It all began way back in 1990 with the arrest of an Australian man, Andrew Salvatore Cervelli, for narcotic possession.
Right.
And the tampering that led to Cervelli's eventual acquittal was the swapping of the undergarment used to hide the narcotics with a smaller pair. This criminal act was later confirmed in 1996 by Australian Interpol intelligence. They stated clearly that a bribe had been paid to make the swap happen.
And now, more than 3 decades later, on January 3rd, 2026, the trial court convicted Antony Raju, who was the junior lawyer on the case back then, along with the court clerk, K.S. Jose.
Yes, they were found guilty of criminal conspiracy, forgery, and other related crimes.
And the consequence for Raju was immediate.
Immediate and very serious. Automatic disqualification as an MLA under Section 8 of the Representation of the People Act, 1951. And the article highlights that a disqualification for this specific offense, an offense against the administration of justice, is extremely rare in the history of the Carroll Assembly.
So what was the forensic proof that finally nailed the conviction after all these years?
The key was the forensic examination of the garment itself. It conclusively proved it had been altered during that brief window when it was in Raju's custody between April and August of 1990.
What did the report say?
It detailed inconsistencies in the stitching, different threads being used, a cut and restitched label, all proof that the evidence had been deliberately swapped and modified.
The length of this delay just speaks to a profound systemic failure. The former Circle Inspector, K.K. Jayamosan, even recalled Raju making a casual bomb joke about the case early on. What is the takeaway here about the speed of justice?
The delay itself is the core insight. The case just languished. It held only 22 sittings between 2014 and 2022.
Unbelievable.
And this lack of urgency continued until a journalist, Anil Emmanuel, his persistent investigation drew attention to the delays. That culminated in a Supreme Court directive in November 2024 that finally forced its completion. 32 years is just too long for any case, let alone one involving a direct assault on the integrity of evidence.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, what message does this whole saga send about the justice system?
Well, as noted by former High Court Judge Kamal Pasha, this case sends a wrong message. It suggests the existence of separate, slower justice systems for the affluent or politically connected. The massive delay implies that influence or a lack of judicial urgency can fundamentally compromise the fairness of the system. So while Raju prepares his appeal, the verdict stands as a potent, if very slow, reminder that even offenses hidden for decades can eventually be brought to light.
Our final deep dive brings us to a stark conflict between tradition and technology in Rajasthan's Jalore district. Screening the screen. Rajasthan's Caste Diktat on women's smartphones. I see. We meet a young woman, Deshu Chaudhary, who uses her smartphone for college tuition, but she's forced to hide it because the village elders view it as an indicator of bad character or loose morals, especially if the woman is unmarried.
And the scrutiny culminated in a dramatic extra-constitutional order. On December 21st, the Chaudhary Caste Panchayat issued a decree. From January 26th, all women must use only basic, cameraless phones.
And girls who are studying.
They could use them, but only when they were strictly at home.
The quote from the Panchayat head was so revealing of the underlying patriarchal fear. He said, anyway, what will women do with smartphones? They don't need to run offices.
Exactly. But the lifespan of this order was very short. The video of the ruling went viral. It attracted intense international condemnation. Some even compared it to policies of the Taliban, and it generated an immediate notice from the National Human Rights Commission.
So there was swift intervention.
Very swift. Following intervention from the Jalore deputy magistrate, the Caste Panchayat retracted the order just 4 days later, on December 25th.
So while the men publicly claim the decision was about screen addiction in children, the article reveals the elders are really reacting to technology acting as an escape valve from their restrictive social control.
That is the key synthesis here. They are reacting to the unprecedented autonomy that social media provides. It allows young women to form aspirations outside of traditional roles, to explore modeling, to wear clothes like pants, to express feelings.
And to form relationships online.
And crucially, to form online relationships. This last point is critical because online relationships sometimes lead women to leave what are known as Satawada marriages.
And just for clarity for the listener, what exactly are Satawada marriages?
A Satawada refers to reciprocal marriages between siblings or families. It's a fundamental part of the traditional social structure. So when a young woman leaves a marriage like that, it destabilizes two families and often results in heavy fines from the panchayat. The smartphone is the modern catalyst that enables this disruption.
So the technology is exposing the cracks in the traditional structure. This brings us to the observation from a local teacher, Shweta Acharya. She connects this restrictive diktat to a deeper fear about women's economic and intellectual growth.
Yes, she observed that over a decade of teaching, the most brilliant girls often drop out because families fear they'll become more educated than their male counterparts, who often stop at class 12. So the combination of digital restriction and limited exposure effectively makes women see marriage as the primary and often only path for their life.
And this diktat stands in stark contrast to the existing reality of digital access. Statistics show only 48.45% of women own a mobile phone in rural India, compared to over 80% of men. This was never about digital health.
No, it was a clear effort to enforce social control and restrict personal freedom through an extra-constitutional body. And it contrasts so sharply with genuine, constructive digital detox initiatives you see in other villages in Karnataka and Maharashtra, which focus on communal well-being, not restricting one gender's autonomy.
What an immense set of sources today. It really shows the struggle for justice in Titan at every single level, from the fragility of judicial integrity in Kerala to the complexity of global influence in the Red Sea, the fundamental democratic hurdles faced by migrant workers in West Bengal, the frustrating bureaucratic paradoxes in Telangana land reform, and that fight for digital autonomy in Rajasthan.
Indeed. And if we connect this all to the bigger picture, it leaves us with a provocative thought for you to consider. When constitutional institutions designed for protection, like the Women's Commission, publicly fail a victim, and when non-constitutional social bodies like caste panchayats successfully dictate personal freedoms, where does the real power to uphold dignity and justice reside in modern society? Is it in the letter of the law, or is it in the speed and strength of public outrage?
A question well worth mulling over. Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.